Driving is a skill that takes time to learn and experience to execute. And yet far too many people still take to the roads with their concentration impaired by alcohol, drugs, or excessive tiredness. Tonight on Police Camera Action, we look at the truth behind driving under the influence. Since the government launched its anti-drink drive campaign in 1976, it's been estimated that 20,000 lives have been saved and hundreds of thousands more people spared from serious injury. And yet every year, more than 3,500 people are still either killed or seriously injured on Britain's roads as a result of drink-drive accidents. But a recent government survey revealed that 1 in 6 drivers are still quite happy to get behind the wheel, having drunk 2 pints of beer or 4 glasses of wine, an amount that would put many people over the legal limit. More of these drivers later. We've decided to conduct our own drink driving experiment using our human guinea pig. This is Jenny. Jenny's driving is about to be monitored on this specially designed simulator program.
Now please study the distance between you and the vehicle ahead. As this vehicle travels along the motorway, it will vary its speed. Please follow it, maintaining the current distance.
We're now going to ask her to take the same driving program again after having drunk just 2 glasses of wine. But first, let's see if she's over the limit. Well, there you have it. According to the law, she's safe to drive. But we'll come back to Jenny a little later on to see what effect, if any, those 2 glasses of wine actually have on her driving. The hour after the pubs close is a prime time for drunk drivers. And when Thames Valley Police spotted a speeding motorist at 10 to midnight, dangerously manoeuvring between traffic, they certainly suspected drink to be a factor. But even with that thought in mind, what he did next astonished them. Amazingly, he wasn't drunk. He'd lost control of the car because he was a disqualified driver and had climbed into the back seat on spotting the police. He was already known to the police and was sent to a juvenile detention centre for a number of driving offences. Police want to talk to this driver about his broken brake light. But it looks like the driver has seen the police in his rearview mirror and panic has taken hold. The driver was later fined and disqualified for 1 year. But it's normally how you're driving that alerts police suspicion to drink drivers.
Still 55 miles an hour, lane 3, is weaving towards lane 4. Right, no. Yeah, blue lights now illuminated, attempting to stop the vehicle.
But the driver doesn't want to stop.
Would appear it's not intending to stop. It's continuing lane 2, speed is increasing.
He's decided to put his foot down and reaches speeds well over the legal limit.
Yeah, 2-2 vehicle is refusing to stop. Speed is increasing. We're now up to 85 miles per hour.
The helicopter support unit assists the police on the ground by following the vehicle.
Could you, if suitable, attempt to invite the vehicle to leave at 26? Charlie Romeo 90 is that location with Stinger.
The control room, air unit and ground forces work together to guide the vehicle towards a particular junction where police are lying in wait with a trap. They have a Stinger, a device commonly used in pursuits that police lay across the road to puncture the car's tyres and slowly bring it to a halt.
We're trying to keep the vehicle on. It looks as though it was intended to try and get off at Charnock, but so we confirm we're still south-south-south from Charnock. Yeah, Tango X-ray 22, we're approaching 27, we're about a mile away. If they can get Stinger out, the vehicle is weaving all over the carriageway. We're at the 1 mile mark.
When the police try to overtake the moving vehicle, the driver tries to hit the police car.
Yeah, Tango X-ray 22, yeah, the vehicle is deliberately trying to hit the police vehicle as we were going past. In view of that, we are remaining behind him. We're not going to try and get past him due to the We're 300 metres now from 26.
The driver is totally erratic in his attempt to stop the police overtaking and is driving very dangerously at speeds of around 100 miles an hour.
In case he dives off. And the vehicle is off at 26.
As planned, the vehicle is forced off at the correct exit, but he's driving far too fast for the bend.
Yeah, vehicle overturned, vehicle overturned. Quick, get it.
The car hasn't even got as far as the Stinger trap before the occupants have to make a run for it. And whilst one heads for the woods, the other takes a different route. He opts to cross the busy motorway slip road to hide out in the nearby field.
799 to BD.
The helicopter camera turns its attention to the other offender.
Everybody again to come onto the ground. We're trying to identify a dog handler to get into a heat source. Can you just try again, please?
Its thermal imaging camera, which shows heat as white light, can spot him lying low in the bushes. Police on the ground are only meters away, but in the darkness they need helicopter assistance.
9 to BD.
Over in the field, other officers have caught his accomplice.
Yeah, one's been detained in the large open field after short foot pursuit, and is with 2 officers now.
Back in the bushes, the police are closing in on the second suspect.
Any officer receiving on the edge ground channel, give me a call, please. You're stood about 10 yards away from where we think the suspect is.
Hey, Charlie Oscar 26. The dog handler's to the left of me as you look.
Yeah, well, if you walk towards the dog handler now, you will come across somebody lying in the grass.
There's nowhere for him to hide, and within seconds the police have homed in.
And I think there's 2 detained.
Both offenders are arrested and taken back to the police station. Earlier, we set Jenny a test on the simulator, and then again after she'd drunk 2 glasses of white wine. Andrew, you've been looking at that tape of the second test. Any discernible difference in Jenny's driving?
Well, several really quite big differences in terms of her reactions to other traffic. She was braking later and harder. She was certainly weaving around within the lane much more than she was on the first trial. She missed a couple of road signs, so several quite big differences, yes.
So, although she'd only drunk 2 glasses of wine and appeared to be under the legal limit, it was still having a bad effect on her driving skill?
Well, it certainly was, and alcohol affects different people in different ways, and certainly the level that you reach can be a factor of gender, height, weight, and how much you've eaten that day.
Well, the message from that is clear. Even small amounts of alcohol can have a damaging effect on your driving ability. The safest advice, as always, is if you're going to drive, then don't drink. And perhaps the rule of thumb should not be 1 for the road, but none for the road. It was obvious to Northern Constabulary officers that something was affecting this man's driving. The country lane may have been quite narrow, but he really couldn't keep off the grass. When they pulled him over, they realised that he'd had more than 1 for the road. In fact, he was so drunk he could hardly stand up. He was arrested and taken back to the police station. He later received a driving ban and a fine. A wet night in the north of Scotland, and police are following a black Ford through quiet residential streets. Given the time of night and bad driving, they suspect that the driver may have been drinking. But when they try to stop the car, it races off. As police give chase, the suspect speeds at over 60 miles an hour in the rain. The car doesn't even stop for this red light, although the police have to give way to cross traffic. This driver thinks he can outwit the police. But the handbrake turn fails, and when they try to drive off, they find themselves blocked in by the police, so attempt to flee on foot. However, both are quickly captured, and the driver later received a custodial sentence. In Hartlepool, police witness another example of bad driving. The driver in front uses the right turn lanes on the wrong side of the road to overtake, and soon reaches speeds of 70 miles an hour in a 30 zone. But those aren't the only offences. When police pull him over, they find drugs in the car, and he was later convicted of dangerous driving and possessing cannabis. He received a fine and points on his licence. After the break, Spaced Out, how drug users can be exposed by new police tests. And how lack of sleep can be just as dangerous as too much alcohol out on the roads. Evidence of drug abuse is a growing factor in fatal road accidents. But unlike alcohol, there are no legal drug limits for driving. It's like fatigue. It's all a question of whether or not you're fit to drive. If the drugs you've taken impair your ability to drive safely, then you're likely to be arrested, even if the drug in question is a perfectly legal prescribed medicine.
OK, tilt your head back. We'll begin. Left.
Over the last couple of years, forces across the country have introduced what they call field impairment tests. They're designed to measure whether a person's ability to drive has been impaired. Essex was one of the first forces to introduce them, and you can see a couple of their officers behind me carrying out the tests with a motorist. They've already achieved a number of convictions using these tests, including one where the offender had taken prescribed drugs. In the United States, this type of testing at the roadside is common practice. You can see from these videos how a person's inability to perform simple tasks could make them a danger on the road. Coordination, balance, and spatial awareness are all lacking in these drivers. This man can't even walk in a straight line, never mind drive.
Right.
And if you can't find your own nose, then locating the brakes could prove to be a real problem. Certainly a sobering thought to imagine him behind the wheel. And it's never a good idea to draw attention to your driving if you've got something to hide. In Northern Ireland, police want to stop this driver for speeding. As he pulls over, a sharp-eyed officer saw the passenger throw something out of the window just before the car stopped. If you look at it again in slow motion, you can see the item flying over the crash barrier. A search located a package containing 30 ecstasy tablets. The driver was convicted of excess speed, and the passenger was convicted of possession of illegal drugs. The Department of Transport estimate that at least 300 people are killed every year when a driver falls asleep at the wheel. And that's claiming more lives than drink driving. Driving when overly tired can be just as dangerous as driving when you're drunk. And ignoring the consequences of that can have devastating effects.
Gary Hart, the Land Rover driver who caused the Selby rail disaster last winter, was found guilty today of causing death by dangerous driving. He'd fallen asleep at the wheel when his vehicle ran off a motorway and onto the East Coast main line. 10 people died in the subsequent crash.
Scientists at Loughborough University have conducted extensive tests into the connections between tiredness and poor driving. Their research involves monitoring subjects' driving habits after varying their sleep patterns. Professor Jim Horn runs the Sleep Research Centre here at Loughborough and was also an expert witness in the trial of Gary Hart. Professor, how much more likely are we to have an accident if we're tired?
Well, if one's driving between 4 and 6 o'clock in the morning, then you're 10 times or even 20 times more likely to fall asleep at the wheel than at, say, 10 o'clock in the morning. Modern cars are very pleasant to drive, there's power steering and comfortable seats and everything is in easy reach, but it really turns them into beds on wheels. And I think people are much more inclined to drive longer distances now because the cars are so comfortable, and also take more risks with falling asleep at the wheel.
So it is important to get a good night's sleep before setting out on a long journey. Never begin a journey if you're already feeling tired, and if you begin to experience the symptoms of tiredness, then get off the road. Those who drive for a living are particularly vulnerable to lapses in concentration from tiredness.
Vehicle ahead seems to be wandering around.
When the Metropolitan Police spotted a driver behaving erratically in the early morning, they concluded that he must be suffering some kind of impairment.
Vehicle in front, continually braking, and he's moving, as you can see, from the near side to the offside of the lane and back again. Braking again, braking. I don't know if it's a drunken charge or the guy's falling asleep, but he's wandering all over the place.
After talking to him, they found him to be excessively tired, although the shock of being pulled over soon woke him up. The police advised him to rest at the next set of services, and he was fortunate to be let off so lightly. Unlike our next driver, his unsteady driving looked to be the result of drink, drugs, or tiredness. The random weaving out of his lane certainly suggests it, and at 10 to 7 in the morning, tiredness would seem to be the most obvious cause. The lorry's careless wandering almost causes an accident. When the police pulled him over, they discovered that it wasn't tiredness, drink, or drugs that was responsible for these near misses. In fact, he'd left his glasses at home. His vision was so impaired he could hardly see the road ahead. He was fined £300 and got 3 points on his licence. It's always best to be well rested before setting out on any journey. But what should you do if tiredness creeps up on you when you're already out on the road and you can't pull over and check into a hotel? Well, there are steps you can take to reduce your tiredness and therefore minimise the risk to yourself, your passengers, and of course other road users. Stop as soon as it's safe to do so. Drink a high caffeine drink. It'll have an effect, but it will take around 30 minutes to kick in. So in the meantime, take a 15-minute nap. It'll help revive you. Never eat or drink whilst driving. It gives you an excuse not to stop, and it's dangerous in itself. And don't forget to factor in brakes when planning your trip. Whatever steps you take, it's worth remembering. If you're really tired, there's virtually nothing you can do to stay awake. You can even fall asleep at the wheel with your eyes open. So, no matter where you are or what time of day it is, there's no substitute for a good, old-fashioned rest. And don't forget that when you are tired, alcohol can have a much more potent effect. Whether he was tired or not, the man being held up by police on the right had been involved in a driving accident. But his total lack of coordination has nothing to do with the shock of the accident. He was drunk. In fact, he was so legless that the police had to provide a chair. His drinking binge cost him £300 and an 18-month driving ban. It's not only coordination that's tempered by alcohol. It can also have a detrimental effect on your judgment. This drunken cyclist was found travelling on the hard shoulder of a motorway. He was later fined £50 at court. At least the cyclist knew how to get home, which is more than can be said for this man. He wasn't even sure where he was when police found him wandering along a dual carriageway in the early hours of the morning. Several motorists had reported almost running him over as he stumbled along the side of the carriageway wearing dark clothing, 10 miles from home. The police gave him a stern talking to and took him to a much safer route.
Walk right over here to him.
And finally, being at home rather than out on the road is a much safer place if you are impaired in some way. This driver wasn't so far from his home in Florida, but was reported to police for racing his truck in a field in the early hours of the morning.
His truck stuck out here in the field. You're out here driving a truck and you're drunk. You could have run into somebody's house.
Yeah, no.
He was so drunk he knew he was incapable of performing the sobriety tests. It hadn't stopped him driving, but he was well aware of his limitations.
Why don't you give it a try? Stand back
Sir,
here.
I can't.
You can't? Why not?
Well, one reason, I'm drunk, man. That's your car.
He was arrested and spent 10 days in jail and fined $1,500.
There you go. You can have your feet tied together.
Man, I'm drunker than a skunk, and I ain't hurting nobody.
He may not have hurt anyone on this occasion, but it's never a good idea to drive under the influence.
Footy highlights from one of the toughest leagues in Europe. Bundesliga highlights will be here on Monday night at 10. Next, Saturday afternoon movie time with Gregory Peck in the Korean War drama MacArthur.
Sober when you're gonna get drunk again.